I'm Judy Crocker. I'm the facilitator for the Loddon Landcare Network, which I have been for the last 18 years. The area consists of a large area actually, west of Bendigo to the Loddon River, north to Bridgewater, and then south to Barringup and Maldon area. The landscape across that area consists of farmland and a lot of public land. The Loddon Landcare Network has a very strong committee which meets every 2 months. That committee is actually very necessary and quite exciting at some meetings. Everyone brings their problems and their successes and discusses them with the other members, and that gives all members of the network a chance to actually understand what's going on with the groups next door and how they can interact with them and connect with them. Ross Colliver came to one of our executive meetings, and his aim was to get us thinking about what the long-term problems we had and how we should focus, how we could focus on finding answers. And out of that meeting came a question: how do farmers and peri-urban group actually attract attention and interest from the city people, and how could we involve them in some of the projects we do and communicate with them what we were doing, I suppose, and involve them as well. So the West Morong farmers are very involved in the Shelburne forest restoration and the curlew captive breeding and release program. They are very involved with that with the Upper Spring Creek group, so both groups are actually focusing on that. The groups have started to encourage people from the city or from the wider community to come and visit. So we run tours and events looking at the curlews themselves and then exploring the habitat that we've been able to work on for the last 10 years. And out of that has come different people who want to join the program. Some just want to give us some money, which is wonderful, but some actually come and join the monitoring system that we have going. Barringup is a mixture of peri-urban and farmland. So they have started a school program where they invite a school group to come out to a farm, and they give them a farm experience for the day with, always feeding the lambs, of course, is the most popular. And that's proved to be very successful, except the local school closed recently, and I wondered what would happen, but the group have got themselves together again and they're expanding now and going to bigger schools in the area. And they know they can do it and they know how to do it now with a small group, and I'm sure they'll succeed. The Loddon Landcare group is mainly in an area where the farmers are getting fairly elderly, so they've started a history compilation of everything in the area. They've produced calendars which are absolutely marvellous and have sold very well. With all the information they've gathered, they're moving on to producing a book. This in itself is involving the whole community in the Landcare group. They may not attend the Landcare group, but they're actually providing them lots of information. Is all this effort making a difference? Well, it's certainly promoted the groups and what they do. Some groups have increased in membership and others haven't, but their numbers working with the group in the field have certainly increased with monitoring, and certainly there is a lot more interest, particularly with the curlew project, which is always desperate for funds, and certainly a lot of funds have come through because of the promotion and the events that we've run. We have lots of willing wider community members interested in being part of the projects. This doesn't increase our meeting numbers at all because we find that a lot of urban people are shift workers these days. They don't attend meetings, or they're younger people with families, so once again they don't attend meetings at night. So when you go to meetings, we find we don't always have a lot of people there, but there is actually a lot of people working for the network in the field and providing information. The captive breeding and release program for the bushstone curlew actually started probably 10 years ago, and we found that habitat was our biggest restraint, because if the habitat's not good enough, the birds don't survive in the wild, and anything that we release certainly won't survive either. So as part of the restoration for the whole area, we concentrated on the Shelburne Nature Conservation Reserve, which was formerly a state government wood area, so it's very degraded and now under the control of Parks Vic, who of course never have any funds. Am I allowed to say that? So the restoration of the Shelburne Forest, which is 800 hectares, became a very important issue. We had to establish really good partnerships with DELP and also Parks Vic. To be able to release a threatened species, there is an enormous amount of paperwork and a lot of control over what you do by the state government, and we really needed their partnership support. We can't do anything in the forest these days unless we have their support and their approval. And to do that, we have to abide by their rules of how we manage the projects and how we manage the monitoring. In frustration from my point of view, I suppose, was this was taking so long and so difficult that several times I went to the state government ministers through our local politician to actually get somebody from above to push these things through, which worked, but once again it took a long time. So what we've established out of all of this now, that our curlew permission to release will probably come through next year. We can now work on the restoration of the Shelburne Forest with Parks Vic approval. We've found that planning is extremely important. So all our projects now are very planned down to the last detail, and they sit there until we have all the right approvals and signatures and letters in place, and then the funding, of course, has to be appropriate as well. 5 years ago, with both of these projects, we just would have involved the local rangers in our planning and got permission, and they would have actually worked with us to move forward on these projects. But nowadays, everything has to be so scientific and government controlled that it does make it difficult for landcare groups individually, apart from networks, to actually plan and proceed with projects. It takes so much time that people tend to lose interest actually before you get started. The government changes so often, and every time it changes, the agency staff changes. So whereas once upon a time, I could probably go back 10 years, the agencies had a lot of local knowledge about what landcare groups were doing and how they were operating and what their projects were. This has now all been lost, basically, so every time we start a project and figure out who's actually going to be supporting us, we have to start from scratch again. Groups need to extend their partnerships to not only their local agencies, but to their politicians. When the last government changed, not long after it, I was battling, I don't know, probably DELP, I think. And I had it was Parks Vic. And I had a long conversation with the local politician. And she asked me a lot about Landcare, the Landcare groups and how Landcare operated, because she didn't know anything about it. And when she went to Parliament the next week and sitting and raised it, she said she was the only person in the room who actually knew anything about Landcare. And that was when the facilitator, the repeat of the facilitator funding was coming up. Landcare groups are volunteers who are more interested in on-ground work. They're not really interested in the bureaucracies that control what they do. I think a facilitator's role has changed in probably the last 5 years. Whereas to support a Landcare group now involves a lot more communication, promotion, and building partnerships, which go all the way to the government, basically. Because if the government and the ministers change so often, if the government doesn't understand what's happening on the ground and how the Landcare groups are working, they won't change anything or they won't continue what's working. A good relationship with your local member is very important to that linkage. But as a facilitator, I don't make any major decisions or actions without bringing it back to the committee. As a strong group, all working to solve everyone's problems, not just individuals.